Hundreds of years ago, the Deshitan Raven clan of the Tlingit Indians founded the village of Angoon on southeast Alaska's spectacular Admiralty Island. On October 24, 1982, the people of Angoon began a 3-day commemoration ceremony. The ceremony culminated on October 26th, the 100th anniversary of an event that still burns in the memory of this village, an event that marks the darkest hour in its history, but one from which these people have risen back. Memory has lived on all these 100 years, for it has been their tradition to recount the story lest it be forgotten. It is the tradition of the Tlingits of southeast Alaska that the spoken word should carry history and culture, that their beautiful creations of wood and fiber should also represent their history and their lineage, and that these highly prized works of art be displayed as their history is recounted. Yes, it is the tradition of the Raven Beaver clan, the Dog Salmon clan, the Killer Whale, and the Bear, 4 major clans of this village, that the heartbreak of October 26, 1882, can only be set to rest with an event like this. A coming together of all the people whose roots are here, wherever they may live today. A sharing of grief, a sharing of joy, the dedication of physical monuments in the ancient manner, and a rededication of spirit. This village was destroyed 100 years ago, attacked by the United States Navy at a time when the highly evolved culture of these people was little understood by the newcomers, so intent to establish a foothold and tap the natural wealth that had sustained the Tlingits for thousands of years. Whether the Angoon bombardment, as it has come to be known, was the result of simple misunderstanding between 2 cultures in collision, or whether it was more malicious in intent, is something historians and anthropologists may never fully set to rest. But the pain of that day 100 years ago, of that first winter with their shelter and food supply destroyed, of the years of rebuilding, has been resolved as the ancient Tlingit culture prescribed it must be, in a public event. You will see as this event unfolds not only the story behind the tragedy, but the story of an indomitable spirit and the culture that preserves it. You will see how that culture even today dictates a complex order of rights and obligations that make all the clans interdependent upon each other. These proceedings may appear deceptively simple to some, but to those who appreciate the details and the nuances, there is a wealth of meaning and emotion. So come with us now and discover the interesting twists this commemoration will take and what these teach us about this fascinating Tlingit culture, how it adapts to modern times, but how it sometimes bends the people back to traditional ways. For this is Angoon, 100 years later. The ceremony commemorating the 100th anniversary of the bombardment of Angoon began in the traditional Tlingit manner, with group dancing. In this first part, called Warming of Hands, clan leaders welcomed the assembled people, symbolically inviting them to warm their hands by the host's fire. One at a time, they come forward wearing ceremonial hats, robes or vests that display their clan emblems. Some of the artwork is new, demonstrating the adoption of modern techniques. Some of the pieces are 100 years old or more. They are passed on from one generation to the next, often at ceremonies like this. The more times a piece has been passed on or displayed at a ceremony, the greater its cultural and emotional value to the clan. These artifacts come to embody the people who wore them before and the events at which they were displayed. They are shown off rarely, usually only at ceremonies. Always, warming of hands involves dancing and fellowship. for the purpose is to bring the people together spiritually as well as physically. All the many clans of the Tlinkits fall into one of two major subdivisions of the entire Tlingit nation, the eagle and the raven. So it is said that the beaver comes under the raven, the dog salmon comes under the raven, while the killer whale and the bear come under the eagle. For traditional Tlinkits, society, and especially ceremonial life, are governed by a rich and complicated pattern of interactions between the two sides, the eagles and the ravens. For example, all marriages are between an eagle and a raven, never between members of the same side. Clan lineage is traced through the mother's family line rather than through the father's, as in European cultures. Thus, all the children belong to their mother's clan. From the mother's clan, the children inherit the right to use the clan's emblems, claim its history, and share its prestige and wealth. Besides their parents, the most important person in the children's life is their mother's brother. That's their maternal uncle. The uncle is the person most responsible for the children's education and development into mature members of their mother's clan. The uncles were stern taskmasters. For a traditional Tlingit, his clan is that of his mother, and he calls his ancestral clan homeland, the land of my uncles. One of Jay Hammond's last public appearances as governor of Alaska was at Angoon's commemoration ceremony. Tlinkits bestow ceremonial names upon their own people, and to non-Tlinkits they greatly respect. Ceremonial names are handed down from generation to generation. The names of great people might not be given again for several generations, until a person of appropriate stature and accomplishment is found. When a person has been honored with a name from the past, he assumes all the rights and obligations of the person who last held that name, including clan relationships. In terms of the ceremonial life of the clan, the contemporary person has become the deceased person who had that name. So in a manner of thinking, great leaders and loved ones are with the Tlinkits again. As we shall see later, this can be a source of comfort and strength to all.
And now you will witness the formal and traditional giving of name.
Here, Governor Hammond is officially adopted into the brown bear clan. His new name means, you don't see a brown bear coming through the forest. When you first see him, he's already in front of you.
The name will now be placed on Governor Hammond, the Tlingit name. Siqatusteja, 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 Siqatusteja. Thank you very much.
And as in all things Tlingit, the family must share in the occasion. In this case, a brand new family of clan brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and so on.
Today, however, has as well a sad side. Since the three-way celebration really marks the 100th anniversary of a historical event which no American can think back upon without some sense of shame. America, for example, conquered our so-called Wild West, but did so in a manner most now find abhorrent. The victims of one such occurrence we are commemorating here today. On October 26, 1882, the U.S. Navy, for whatever reason, misinformation, rumor, fear, cultural ignorance, bad communications, miscalculations, or who knows, to, quote, teach the natives a lesson, bombarded, burned, and destroyed this native village of Angoon. In the process, they willfully, according to reports, attempted to destroy the traditions of this native village. Along with all provisions and homes, with winter soon to arrive, this left an entire people to starve or die from the elements. And some, I understand, did.
This was Tlingit Ani, land of the Tlingit, the land over which they had enjoyed undisputed dominion for centuries. With the coming of the white men and their superior weapons, this was changing. When the first Europeans appeared on their shore in the 1700s, the Tlingits were respected and feared by the other native peoples along the entire North Pacific coast, from Alaska to California. They were the fiercest warriors, the most aggressive traders, and the shrewdest. The rich coastal environment and forest provided more than enough food to sustain them and allowed leisure time for art and a rich social life. Throughout southeast Alaska, each of the Tlingit tribes sought to be the wealthiest, the most powerful, the most artistic, and the noblest. Within each clan, great leaders emerged, rising according to their abilities and accomplishments. Their wealth and prestige brought honor to their clans. Lineage and ancestry was all important. Nobility and rank amongst the Tlingits was no less important in their world than among the royal families of Europe. High caste Tlingits spoke their language with an eloquence equal to that, for example, of the English upper classes. By 1880, the fur seal population had already been wiped out to satisfy the markets of Europe, and now the Americans were establishing large commercial fishing operations, helping themselves to the salmon runs long considered the property of the clans. Whaling brought more white men, but that also meant more trade goods which the adaptable Tlingits valued, like clothing, metal tools, and guns. The Tlingits had never been conquered in the traditional sense. To their way of thinking, this was still their land. The foreigners presented as many benefits as threats. It was an uneasy peace, and the Tlingits' pride demanded they retain their traditional stature as they were accustomed. The Northwest Trading Company ran a reduction plant at Kootznoowoo near Angoon, where they made herring and whale oil. Tlingit, a Tlingit medicine man born of noble blood, was employed by the company as helmsman on a whaling launch. On October 22nd, a harpoon gun exploded, killing Tlingit. It was Tlingit law that if a person was killed working for someone else, the employer must make a restitution payment. Such restitution payments had been made by the company in the past. However, 2 weeks earlier, another Tlingit had been accidentally killed, and the customary payment was not made. The Indians let the matter go, but now this was a medicine man, and a nobleman at that. Tlingit law must be honored. The Indians took possession of 2 launches until such time as payment was made, and also to ensure the equipment associated with the death was not used again until after the mourning period. Tlingit's death required sizable restitution payment. 200 blankets were demanded. The highest-ranking American official in the territory of Alaska was at Sitka, Naval Commander E.C. Merriman. He had already decided that no longer would the tribal law of the Tlingits be respected by American forces. It was time, he decided, that the Tlingits acknowledge American supremacy and authority. And so, to make his point, Merriman sailed to Angoon with a fully armed U.S. Revenue Service cutter and a large civilian tugboat he'd armed with cannon and Gatling gun. For punishment, Merriman made his own demand. The Indians must pay him 400 blankets, or he would destroy their village with cannon fire. Merriman ordered the Indians' canoes destroyed to show he meant business. The Tlingits could produce only 81 blankets by the next day, and Merriman launched his attack. First, the nearby storehouses filled with food for winter were shelled and burned. Next, volley after volley of cannon fire struck the great communal clan houses, each with a history reaching back into time and legend, until, one at a time, they fell into rubble. Next, Marines and sailors poured through the ruins, looting and destroying priceless works of art inherited through generations, all adorned with emblems of the clans, symbols of the Tlingits' greatest treasure, their clan identity. That winter, devoid of adequate shelter, their vital canoes, weapons, and food stores all gone, the Tlingits wandered the beaches, scraping together what food they could, such as clams, gumboots, and crab. It is not known how many died that winter of starvation and exposure. It took 5 years to rebuild the village. To this date, there has never been an official investigation of the incident by the government.
While the artifacts and traditional treasures which were destroyed the day of the attack 100 years ago can never be replaced, all residents of Angoon, by the courage you have shown over the past century in recovering from that attack, have created a new history for the citizens of this village, and one of which all Alaskans can be exceedingly proud. We can only hope that in 1982, all Alaskans have learned from the past mistakes and that never again will we permit our people to become so separated into warring factions because of mistrust and misunderstanding. The bombardment of this village 100 years ago is the ultimate example of a tragedy which can strike when people no longer listen. Let's learn from our past mistakes. Our future as a wise and just people can survive with nothing less. Thank you.
These are the representatives of the households of the Peshitan clan. 100 years ago, October 24th, a shell hit our shaman Titlin. For 100 years, we have kept it in our hearts and minds. Why wait 100 years, asked someone. For the first time, we are going to say it. For the first time in 100 years, we are going to say, we have reservations to what extent it was an accident. We have reservations to what extent the shelling of each household was an accident. For 100 years, we had locked this up in our hearts, silently cried and moaned the death of 6 children.
As you might suspect, this is not a traditional Tlingit ceremonial hat. This hat has a different meaning. According to tradition, it is held and displayed as a symbol of a debt unpaid, the debt of respect. The lack of respect the Navy showed for the Tlingit's traditions 100 years ago, and the lack of respect today. Representatives of Angoon have met with the U.S. Navy and requested an official apology for the bombardment, but to date, there has been none. The Tlingits of Angoon symbolically allow the Navy the opportunity to respond. For 2 minutes, all remain silent, waiting. Of the 6 children that died in the bombardment, 3 were from the Killer Whale clan. For Jimmy George, cultural leader of today's Killer Whale people, those deaths symbolize his ancestors' suffering. Here, Mr. George is presented with a replica of the killer whale pole that once stood at Angoon. In this way, Angoon recognizes those killer whales who died. Thank you for accepting this replica. Someday we will build a totem pole in front of your clan house. Thank you. Jimmy George's parents lived through the bombardment, and he remembers the stories they told him about that day and the suffering that followed. The totem image of the killer whale recalls his loved ones and their suffering. Several years ago, Tom Jackson inherited the clan name of Jimmy George's uncle. Today, he fulfills a Tlingit uncle's obligation to provide strength and support. When a boat is destroyed or ruined and cannot be used any longer, then it is put on the beach. When the others say, "Where is your boat?" he says, "It is put ashore. It cannot be used." My children, my children, this is the way I am. I am thanking you for the honor and the strength you are giving me. For now I am still with you, but my time is limited. Here you have brought him among you, honoring him. Thank you. I will not speak lengthily. He is the last among us, If he should have troubles, if his oars should break, I will always depend on you for comfort and strength. Angoon is a raven village of the Deshitan clan. As such, they acted as hosts for a potlatch, or ceremonial feast. Traditional Tlingit foods like salmon and venison are in abundance. But most prized are the delicacies such as herring roe and seal oil. But more than eating and socializing, potlatches are ceremonial affairs. A leader of the Eagles from the village of Cake is ceremonially placing this raven hat upon a raven leader from Kawak. Thus, members of the opposite side always perform ceremonial courtesies for each other, and according to custom, the presence of such visiting dignitaries from other villages lends importance to this commemoration. The dog salmon hat they are holding was made shortly after the bombardment to replace a masterpiece destroyed by the Navy.
We were hesitant to bring this hat out, but now on this occasion we felt it appropriate that this hat should be brought forward that you might see it.
Some pieces of Tlingit art have great reputations, and their display in itself adds importance to a ceremony. This priceless dog salmon hat is almost 100 years old. Two houses of the dog salmon clan stand in Angoon today. Here, a clan member of appropriate rank performs a dance in honor of the dog salmon spirit. The person is hidden behind the blanket because it is the animal spirit that is dancing. According to Tlingit mythology, in the ancient past, each clan formed a special relationship with the animal spirit for which it is named. Today, as in old, many Tlingit still feel a special bond with certain animals, their clan symbols. And just as important, they feel a bond to other people from any community who have the same crest.
Being very frank, I can remember just a few years ago when people would look to Angoon and say, that community hasn't progressed as much as some of the other communities in southeastern Alaska. It doesn't have the roads, it doesn't have the new buildings. But as a matter of fact, what was happening in Angoon would serve to strengthen all of us in the other communities who at that point were making more material advances. Because what was happening in Angoon was a people husbanding its strength, a people protecting its culture, a people saying to the outside world, we will develop at our own pace. There are things that we hold dear and that we cherish and that we treasure that you may not understand. And during these 3 days, as you celebrate, what you are doing is commemorating, memorializing, and serving notice that this is a people that will never be beaten, that this is a people that will never succumb, a people who may be shelled, a people who may have their homes destroyed, a people who may have at a moment in time their livelihood destroyed, but a people who in spirit will never ever die.
Today, in living proof of that spirit, Angoon is dedicating 3 totem poles. Someday there will be more, all replicas of poles that once stood here. Totem poles are carved and erected for ceremonial purposes like this 100-year commemoration. Traditionally, they are commissioned by leaders to commemorate a relative, an historic event, or to display inherited clan emblems. Here, they are dedicating commemorative poles in honor of clan members who suffered and died because of the bombardment. Totem poles are the embodiment of the clan's history, its cultural identity, and a source of pride to its members.
There's a culture and it's alive and shouldn't be forgotten. I did all this whole work, and this project was a lot of work. I've never worked so hard at anything in my life, and I did it all for the young people. When they go on their way to school, you know, in the morning, they're half awake, they can look up and say, well, that represents me, you know, that's me up there.
And who will these children be? What will they believe in? Will it be the human values of their centuries-old culture, and will these give them a sense of identity and belonging in the world? Will they grow up believing and practicing the ideals of freedom, fairness, and generosity that Americans are so proud of? These are all hopes that the people of Angoon have for their young ones, children who hopefully will never know the pain born of ignorance and prejudice. This commemoration ceremony has done much to heal the wound, to reconcile the suffering of those now gone, the hurt of those who remember their story, the wounded pride of these proud people. But the wound is not fully healed. It cannot be, not until the United States Navy responds with the one gesture so important to these people, to any civilized people, an apology for a wrong committed. Once upon a time, America was a young nation eager to expand its frontiers, tame the wilderness, and harness its wealth. But in the overconfidence and exuberance of youth, mistakes are made. Today, America is a more mature nation. Is it not a sign of maturity to admit one's mistakes? Is it not a sign of true greatness for the mighty to acknowledge the small?